It's noon, so welcome and thank you for joining us today, everybody, for HMANA's July Lunch and Learn presentation. I'm glad that you could be here with us. I'm Julie Brown. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director at HMANA, and we are excited to welcome Will Weber, Chair of HMANA's Climate Committee today to speak about climate change and raptors, a very relevant topic. No matter where you are joining from today, I'm betting that you have seen the effects of climate change, whether it's this very hot summer, droughts, storms, fires, all seemingly and increasingly becoming our new normal. So Will's going to be talking about, what this means for raptors, and I'm excited to hear his presentation. Just a few things before we get started. As usual, this talk is being recorded. We are also live streaming on our Facebook page, and you can view any of our past Lunch and Learn programs on our Facebook page anytime, or on our website. You can scroll down to the What's New section of our homepage, or under our Events and Tours tab, you can go to Past Events. And we are now up to date with all our past Lunch and Learns, so you can view last month's Red-tailed Hawk program by Bryce Robinson, or any of the others you may have missed. And we have disabled the audio and video. That's something we do now to reduce distraction during talks. But even though you're muted, we always really love to connect with you. So use the chat, tell us where you're joining from. Any comments or questions you can put in the chat throughout Will's talk, and Kat will ask your questions at the end of the program. I forgot to mention that I'm joined by Kat Lauer, and she's HMANA's administrative assistant. She's going to be handling the questions at the end, as well as introducing Will. So also, if you have any interesting experiences or observations with raptors lately, you can put that in the chat. We love hearing about that. I'm listening to a recently fledged broadwing begging for food right now outside my window. Everywhere I go right now in New Hampshire, I'm hearing begging broadwings. So with that, I will turn things over to Kat.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, everybody. We are so thrilled to have Will Weber on our Lunch and Learn today. He's going to talk about climate change and raptors. Will Weber was a Peace Corps volunteer science teacher in Nepal from 1971 to 75. He received a Ph.D. in natural resources from the University of Michigan. He was founder and first president of the Holiday Beach Migration Observatory in Ontario. Will has been a board member or a committee chair of HMANA for more than 4 decades. He was instrumental in the development of HMANA's HawkCount databases and the creation of the Raptor Population Index. This utilizes HawkCount data to determine raptor population trends at sites across North America. Will founded and directed Journeys International, and he's led more than 60 international nature and cultural expeditions to Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Pacific. He is now retired and lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he's an enthusiastic birder and involved in local land conservancy efforts. Please welcome Will. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kat. And thank you for tuning in today to this presentation. It's very timely, of course. I'm sure many of you have heard that we have recently experienced the 2 hottest days on record, Sunday and Monday in succession, as per the Copernicus Climate Change Service of the European Union. And it seems like it's getting hotter and hotter because it's also the 13th month that's hotter than any previous months. So in that context, it's certainly timely to talk about the impact of climate change, not just on raptors, but on all of our biological life. But we'll focus specifically on raptors. Also, I'd like to say a little bit about the HMANA Climate Committee. it's an open body, and if any of you feel like you might like to participate in our discussions, you would certainly be welcome. We meet monthly, usually the fourth Thursday of the month, and you can contact Julie regarding that if you're interested. I think with that, we'll begin a presentation. I should say, as we begin here, oops. Well, Julie, I've got trouble.
What's the problem, Will?
I'm not getting the action off of my screen. Can you see that?
We can see your slide. It says vote, are Raptors winning or losing?
Okay, I've got something obscuring my view of the I can't see it myself. That's funny.
Oh, can you is it the chat window or?
Yeah, it's a window about, I see all the names of the wonderful people who are attending, but can I mute all? Would that help? Mute all, mute all, mute all, mute all. Remove, how about that? I don't want to remove anybody here.
See if you can move the window off your screen.
Yeah, there's a bar up here of the Zoom that just is in the way here. I can't move the window, it seems. I guess you're seeing my my bullet points coming through, but I'm just not sure how to get rid of this screen, get rid of this little box that's telling me about all the people who are in attendance.
Okay. Do you have any ideas, Kat or Carolyn? I'm trying to think.
Is there a little X in the corner that you can close?
Of just that window, not on Zoom in general.
Well, we're up to, I think, your third slide, Will.
Yeah.
We're at the good news.
Well, I am really now. Can you still see it?
Yeah.
I can't see it now at all. I can't see my presentation. I see a Zoom screen. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize to everybody for this.
Up in the
We'll
right
figure it
corner,
out.
can you see something that says view? And then you can go view, standard, side by side.
I don't see it. No.
Okay.
I don't know what to do. I just can't move anything out of the way. I'm going to go back and see if I can remember what it was that I was saying about everything. All right. All right. So I'm going to do a presentation, but I'm not going to be able to see most of my own screen, but I think times that I can probably remember. So the first thing I'm going to, as we talk about surviving climate change, I'm going to ask each of you to think now in terms of how you see the fate of raptors in light of a warming climate. And there's a number of perspectives that you might take. Oops. Oh, well, that's not working either, Julie.
You can see it.
All right. Some are doing.
Oh, we just lost Will's sound.
Lost my sound.
Can we? No, we got it. We can hear you.
Okay. It looks bad. Things are getting worse. Actually, raptors are winning. It's not so bad after all. They're adapting to the climate change. But things keep getting hotter, so it can't be good. And to paraphrase Bob Dylan or Peter, Paul, and Mary, my friend, the answer is blowing in the wind. And as raptor observers, you'll know wind is really critically important, and that's something that we'll get to a little further into the demonstration. So there's the good news. Raptors, wish I could see my slides here.
Oh, Will, we got to figure this out. I wonder if you could stop sharing and share again. That makes me nervous, but you might be able to do that. That might get rid of the window you're seeing. If you're not able to X out in the top right corner of the tab that's blocking your view, maybe you could unshare and then share again.
All right, I got rid of something there. Now I may be there. I may be there.
We're at the good.
Yeah,
I think I'm there, right?
Hey.
you got it?
I think so.
Yay.
Except that I'm not getting, am I sharing or not?
Yes.
We see the good news. Many raptors are.
I can't get the other, let me try again. I cannot get any. All right.
There we go.
Good news. Raptors are adaptable, they're mobile, and they're long-lived. So unlike a lot of other life forms, raptors have a lot of advantages. They're adaptable to different climates. They can move and flee forest fires or droughts or sudden changes in habitat, even storms. And they're long-lived. If they happen to have a failure of reproductive success in 1 year, hopefully they'll be around for. So make them a little susceptible to climate change than a lot of other species. Raptors have a broad distribution. Populations are resilient due to their geographic separation. And if you think about it, think of things like, for example, peregrine falcon or red-tailed hawk. There may be a climate circumstance in one area, but perhaps not in another. And in 1 year, they face the scars of forest fires. They may not need the same kind of habitat. They can use another habitat, and they can travel to a completely different part of the country. There, raptors have survived time, geological time, in previous climate changes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. And of course, if you've attended some of the previous lunch and learns or read some of the articles in HMANA, we know that they've adopted a strategy in some ways to not migrate as far and not face the risks of running the gauntlet of the various perils that lie on their migration pathways by simply not going as far. Not all raptors, of course, things like species like Swainson's hawks and broadwing hawks still fly, but the red-tailed hawk, Cooper's hawk, been wintering farther north. Now, about this matter of surviving time, this is one of my favorite charts, and it condenses 500 million years of geological time. So let's take a little bit of time and see if we can understand it. The left column is temperature. The vertical column is temperature in centigrade, and across the bottom is time in years. And each of those 5 boxes represents a different unit difference of time. So far to the right, we basically have the Holocene, which is the present era, the last 20,000 years. The next box from the right to left is one might consider the glacial period, the last 1,000,000 years. Then we go to the middle box, represents 5 million years. And then the second to last box is about 50 million years. And the box way to the left is 500 million years. So as you can see, the farther left you go, the more time is contained in any unit of movement across. Now, what does this tell us about raptors? Well, this is a high point of temperature in geological time. It's something called the PETM, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Temperatures were considerably higher, perhaps 12 degrees centigrade higher than they are today. And it was largely the result of methane entering the atmosphere, similar to a problem that we have today. And so why is that significant? Well, this other arrow down here that you see, come on. Well, again, not sure what's going on here, but I'm struggling with my trying every possible way to make this work. All right, I'm sorry.
What are you not seeing, Will?
Well, I've got another thing, a report. I don't know what happened. It's telling me that don't report. Okay. All right, I'm sorry. It's just windows are popping up here from Zoom. Back to the presentation. All right, where are we? We are now about 200 million years ago when birds first appeared. All right, when birds evolved from dinosaurs, I'm sure you all realize that. It's a little bit obscure when it happened and when were they really birds and when were they still dinosaurs. But the point is they have emerged as feathered organisms well before this hot temperature. So there was an evolution that occurred that allowed birds to move through that period of time. Now, among the birds that showed up were something called, I'm sorry, for some reason, this is all out of sequence. All right, birds appear here. Now, back to my chart. I'm so sorry, people, for confusion.
No worries, Will.
All right.
We'll get there.
All right, this shows us the glacial period. So we're talking now 1 million years ago. And as you know, the glacial periods occurred again and again and again. So the birds that have evolved through this period of time, millions of years, and got to approximately 1 million years ago, including some species that are probably similar to what we have today, went through a period of adaptation to successive cooling and warming cycles, these glacial and interglacial periods, when in fact the temperatures were far below what they are now, and in some extent nearly what they are today. And so their migratory patterns were established not only in the short term by seasons, but in a longer term based on whether the climate was warming or cooling. Now, terror birds. And these birds lived a long time ago, but they probably bore some similar qualities. Now, we know that as we talk about raptors, they're not all in the same family. There are a variety of families, and no doubt many are extinct. And these are fantastical depictions of what terror birds, flightless birds that existed many years ago may have looked like. And as I see the one on the right, I think of, a gigantic predatory roadrunner. It certainly was extinct long ago, and the nearest ancestors to the terror birds of old are a family called surimas in South America, and they're not nearly as big. I think they're still flightless, and they're not at all like the raptors that we're typically seeing migrating. Now, we talked a little bit about these interglacial periods. The red line here is modern day temperatures, and you can see how many successive cycles these migratory raptors have adapted to. And how do we know this? Well, these cycles are remarkably correlated to ice cores from Greenland, Antarctica, and ocean sediments. So we have a fairly good confidence that these approximately represent the actual temperature changes that occurred over the last 1 million years. And another chart to sort of bring this together, the blue line there is the time that it took to reach the PETM thermal maximum. And at what today we would consider a relatively slow rate of emissions, 1.7 petagrams of carbon per year to get to that high temperature. The line on the left, and you'll know where we are today, is way down at the bottom of that red line. Represents the rate of change today. And the estimate is we're putting 25 petagrams, that's a lot, of carbon per year into the global climate. And the temperature is rising extremely quickly. Here's a chart that gives you a sense. It only goes to 2021, but you can bet with all the reports I've heard, that line, if anything, is getting a little steeper as we come into 2024. And of course, temperature is closely correlated with the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And in fact, in the charts we looked at previously, that was one of the indicators of how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere to give the temperature. So to our present those of you who've watched the spring come and eagerly watched your garden and waited for migratory birds, it's been getting warmer considerably every year, as evident. And this means, of course, timing, phenology of plants and insects and other animals has been thrown off. And raptors being among the animals that are affected by temperature certainly have been affected by that. We all know as well that the tropical Atlantic Ocean, and indeed all the oceans, are at record temperatures. This year, they're expecting a severe hurricane season. And while we end this chart at 2019, I know from what I've heard that the temperatures, that line is continuing up. And this year is the warmest that we've seen. And the result of hurricanes, of course, is tremendous disasters, particularly along the Gulf Coast. But also, this increased temperature, energized atmosphere is contributing to these extreme weather conditions, tornadoes, flash floods, droughts, and flash flooding throughout much of the country. So this is a memorable image. You'll all remember Hurricane Harvey in 2017 that lingered and set precipitations over Houston. And it happens that our migratory raptor season in the fall, many of the raptors go right through this area. So we don't know for sure how much they've been impacted or how they may be able to steer their way around. But we know that with respect to other biological and habitat issues, hurricanes have been really destructive. And we had a recent storm, Beryl, which wasn't a hurricane, but similarly left huge amounts of rain throughout the Texas coastal area, and largely because of a very humid climate holding more water. And the trend is up for hurricanes in the Atlantic, and I believe in the Pacific. The warmer the year, the more fire risk there is. And in the climate committee, we've asked ourselves, what is the consequence of fire for raptor migration? Does the smoke get in their eyes? Does it limit their ability to see prey or to navigate? Does the fire destroy habitat and thus limit the areas where raptors can nest? Is it changing? Is the heat and indeed fire changing wind patterns that make it difficult for raptors to find a traditional navigation route? Well, it was speculation until last year, 2 years ago, when there was an outbreak of extreme temperatures in the Pacific Northwest. I suspect many of you know about it. And what happened, the bird rehabilitators received hundreds of raptor nestlings that had jumped out of their nests because of the hot temperatures. And again, this year, recently, in fact, I think right now, there's a tremendous heat wave, record temperatures in the Northwest. And so we're curious to see if this very same thing might happen again. These happen to be Merlin chicks, but I think from what I read, there were other species as well that were similarly affected. Again, it was critical that it was in June when these birds were very vulnerable and not able to fly. Perhaps the heat wave later in the summer wouldn't be as devastating, but you can see that this kind of thing is happening all over the world, not just in the Pacific Northwest. Now, some of you will recognize here a chart from the Raptor Population Index. The green arrows, the large green arrows, indicate a significant increase in raptor observations at the watch sites that these arrows are located over. The smaller green arrows would be an increase, but not significant, and down-facing arrows decreases. So what it tells us is the bald eagles are apparently doing quite well in terms of reproduction, perhaps not because they're loving a warmer climate, but because, in fact, they are nesting farther north, so more of them are coming through migration sites. Also because the pesticides, organic pesticides in the environment have somewhat cleaned up. And so they're less susceptible to the deformations that were chronic back in the 60s and almost extinguished bald eagles in the lower 48. So, and if you've been to hawk watches or if you live in the Northeast, you know the bald eagle has become quite common. But the other side of it was back in the Northwest, where we're talking about that June of 2022 heat wave, one of the other elements that was observed was ospreys and bald eagles were suffering seriously because fish had moved into deeper waters and were no longer accessible as food sources. So there are all these corollary effects of hot temperature that sometimes we don't think about, but when we really look at individual cases, you discover something that's going on in the overall ecosystem that may have profound effects, of course, not just for raptors, but for the other species. Not all the evidence is positive regarding increased populations or observations at nesting site, at observation sites. The harriers have been diminishing. Again, we don't know for sure exactly why it is, but we know they're diminished. Could it be changes in wind patterns? Could it be matters of insect infestations that are causing problems for young? Could it be a decline of prey species? We don't know. We just know that we're seeing fewer of them. I should note that the maps that you're seeing go through, I believe, 2019, and all of the Raptor Population Index observations and trends will be updated this year. And I think watch for a future Lunch and Learn where we may get updates on many of these species. Rough-legged hawk, again, always a much cherished observation at watch sites, is in decline. What might it be? Well, again, they may be nesting farther north and migrating less distant south, or like other species, like, for example, the gyrfalcon, it may be that combination of habit change in their nesting areas and insect infestations that attack young birds may be reducing their productivity. We don't know for sure. And the much beloved and widely distributed red-tailed hawk, again, it looks pretty serious. We're losing red-tailed hawks. Well, indeed we may be, but again, if you've seen previous Lunch and Learns, you know that a certain amount of this is due to birds simply not migrating as far south because they nest farther north and don't need to go as far south to find a favorable winter habitat. One of the observations that's been made widely is as the climate changes and vegetation moves north, and particularly the farther north you go, it seems the temperatures are getting warmer more quickly. A lot of nesting ranges of many birds are moving farther north. Question is, can the habitat keep up with the changes in temperature? And of course, the broad-winged hawk. Among hawk watchers, there's always a discussion, why didn't we see so many broad-winged hawks this year? Where are they? And it's kind of episodic that some years you can see a lot in any given site, and some years they show up in sites where they haven't been seen before. And other times you can go years and somehow it seems they're diminishing. There's a great deal of fluctuation. There always has been. But is this a result of localized changes in habitat or climate responses? We're not sure. And some of the members of HMANA, including Glory Goodrich, is investigating this very phenomena to try to determine how broad-winged hawks may be affected by climate and other factors. So, what are the great uncertainties regarding the fate of raptors and climate change? Well, if you haven't inferred it already, the biggest question is, how quickly can evolutionary adaptation occur? That is, we know that in the past, over a long period of time, birds have adapted to dramatic changes in temperature, but over a long period of time. Evolution and genetic adaptation doesn't happen necessarily quickly. And the habitat and the temperature and the overall migratory circumstances for raptors is changing very quickly. So we have birds that probably have changed little or not at all, facing habitat and climate circumstances that are, as we know, unprecedented. Another factor that is facilitated by warming and more humid climates is pathogens in the environment. So things like avian flu and H1N1 virus, West Nile virus, are right now affecting bird populations around the world. And while birds have this mobility and adaptability, they're also carrying with them the pathogens that they may have picked up in a previous location, and it quickly spreads, particularly among birds that flock together. Well, raptors in nesting don't typically flock, but if you have observed large numbers of broadwing hawks circling overhead, that wonderful sight, they'll often roost together. So, big question is, are raptors influenced by, right now, avian flu the way they were by West Nile virus? And in fact, people say they think West Nile virus is still around and a trouble for raptors today. How high will the temperatures rise? Well, there is an upper limit. I think that PETM, thermal maximum, probably represents a certain limit. But as we keep putting more carbon in the atmosphere, as methane keeps emerging from pastures and tundra, and people worry about a gigantic burp in the ocean bottom that will release huge clouds of methane into the atmosphere. The trend is the temperature is getting higher faster than it has, even over the last, say, 50 or 100 years that we've been recording this rise in temperature. And of course, the boreal forests, those of us in Eastern North America know that we're dependent on circumstances in our northern states and Canada, and everything from insect infestations to forest fires, as well as storms, and some years very cold and some years very hot. We don't know. We don't know if the broadwing hawks and the ospreys are jumping out of their nests in Canada. No one's there to find that out because it's too warm, or the fish are going to deeper water. But that's one of the questions that needs answering. And then there are the things that are less evident, less directly related to climate, but still are impacting all species. And you won't go into this, but there are various toxins, mercury pollution we worry about in fish-eating birds. Microplastics increasingly, we know, are being ingested by humans as well as other species. And of course, the smoke has become an ever-present risk in the summer and fall. And finally, and maybe most importantly, is how seriously will we take climate change and make efforts to slow it? And the news is not good on this front. We're not meeting our climate goals that were set recently. We're rapidly approaching, and perhaps it's exceeded the sort of magical mark of 1.5 centigrade that scientists tell us once we get there, it's going to be really difficult to turn back. Well, it may be this past weekend we effectively and definitively exceeded that goal. And the result is we need to double down, but in fact, we're not even doing what we said we thought we needed to do earlier. And to get very specific, what can you do to help? Well, work to protect habitat. Kat mentioned, I've gotten involved with the local land conservancy and trying to protect habitat so that it doesn't turn into paved parking lots and developments. It's important in all the areas that raptors use, and in fact, other raptors use. It's not just about raptors, it's about their prey species and the native vegetation that they depend on as well. Particularly critical stopover sites where raptors can rest and hunt. One of the things that we know is in large areas, the native vegetation is completely gone. And so birds are forced to fly farther in order to find a suitable area to put down. It's no longer running the gauntlet of people with rifles. It's kind of running the gauntlet of an absence of a suitable habitat, or habitat that's been burned, or habitat that's been desiccated by drought. We've made a lot of progress in North America to protect certain areas, and I think there's a strong ethic to continue to do so. elsewhere in the world, that ethic may not be so strong. And so we need an international effort to look at protecting large areas suitable for raptors. Oops, again, strange things are happening here. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened.
No problem.
Okay, all right. Well, every day is Earth Day. Maybe that's enough to say at this point. But as far as what you can do, there is the Hawk Migration Association of North America, wonderful journal. Important events that you can become involved in, find out about where your nearest Hawk Watch may be. Very special event, our 50th anniversary coming up in November in Duluth, Minnesota. If you want to mix it up with other Hawk Watchers and really dig deep into what's going on in terms of how raptors are responding to the various influences on them and their environment, there's no better place than this conference. And Julie, I think maybe, here we go. Final slide. Thank you all for listening and being patient through my struggles here. These are 3 websites that can link you to more information about some of the things that I've been talking to you about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Will. That was an incredibly informative presentation. Right now we just have one question. If anybody else has questions for Will, feel free to put them in the comments. But our one question is from Selena Creed. They want to know, any thoughts on how climate change may impact the American goshawk?
I know this is of particular interest, and we have someone on the call here who has immediate insight into the goshawk problem that's been observed in recent fall migrations, including the last one. Carolyn, you want to make a comment about that? Carolyn Hoffman has done so much for HMANA, and she's had the opportunity to see some of the reports from this past fall as she's compiled the next HMANA journal. Carolyn, could you tell us what your observations are about American goshawk?
Well, right now, it's not very good. In the entire eastern flyway, there were only 65 reports this fall of American goshawk, and it wasn't much better in the central, and we don't have many sites in the west. The only site where goshawks went up somewhat was Commissary Ridge in Wyoming, and the hawk watches out west are so far removed that I don't know if that means anything or not. Goshawks do tend to be somewhat cyclical, although one of the studies I've also read is that as climate change continues, those cycles, especially in the lower part of the goshawk's range, seem to be flattening out and not as pronounced as they were in the past. Further north, you still have some of them, but basically, goshawks are not looking good.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. We have one other question from Gordon, who says that anecdotally raptor numbers seem to be down in southern Alberta. What are other people seeing in other areas? So I think that this is about the Raptor Population Index and what it can show us.
Carolyn, maybe you can take that too. You have access to the most immediate information.
Well, that one I don't have a lot of information on. Yes, they do seem to be down, but here again, some of the sites are pretty far apart. So we don't know if they're really down or if they're just flying differently, which could be climate change too, because the winds are definitely changing as far as the depth of the cold fronts that you get, the length of the cold fronts, and the winds that are changing. So some of our hawk watches that have traditionally been very good may no longer be as good because the migration path has changed. That's really about all I can say definitively about that at this point.
Yeah, great. I think it's a very complicated kind of thing to pass out. Janet Peters has one question about Will being able to make a statement to the Army Corps of Engineers regarding a local project in sight distance of the Dinosaur Ridge Hawkwatch. So I think maybe after the call we can connect Janet and Will and see if something can be done about that. And then Christina Clayton says, how will we find new Hawkwatch sites created by migration route changes?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, because with the climate changing as rapidly as it is, you might find a spot that one year is, the new route because of the way the winds have shifted. And then the next year, who knows? The fact that we have these extreme weather events that are not predictable, they're episodic, and we have fronts lingering for longer periods of time than they have in the past, the predictability of raptor migration in any given place is increasingly a problem, because it's not like, the broadwings will always come through in the middle of September on northwest winds, because, well, there may not be northwest winds in the middle of September because of a lingering warm front, or the cold front is in the wrong place to direct the broadwings over a traditional site. I don't know if there's a way to dynamically assess a given season as being more favorable than another area because of the way the winds are developed. We just don't have a good way to recalculate the predictability of seasons. On the one hand, weather has become more predictable in the short term, but season to season, I think it's become less predictable. And there's so many things we didn't talk about with weather, like, for example, the whole polar vortex thing, where because of warming in the Arctic, this circumpolar air system that tends to just circle the Arctic, now it's these big loops in it that come down over the central part of the United States and Asia, and completely disrupt the patterns of wind and rain and temperature. And so I don't know. I guess, as a hawk watcher, you kind of watch those skies for that northwest wind in the fall. And if you can look at a map and see where those are going to be blowing, that might be one indication. But again, there are all the other factors, of course, like the orographic situation, whether they're flying along ridges or along coastlines. And those will still be important. It's not like hawks are going to completely disappear from the traditional sites, but the problem, I think, for us trying to be scientific about it is what in the past had been climate was not a variable. At least it was perhaps, but we weren't thinking about it. There was a certain, while weather would be not necessarily fully predictable, climate was. Climate is more the average over time of weather. And now weather is more predictable in the short term, but climate is less predictable in the long term. And that's a conundrum.
Absolutely. I think it highlights the need to keep a lot of hawk watches strong all across the Americas. So we can kind of get as much information as we can. Ricky has a question. What about shifts in breeding grounds because of temperature change? Is there any data to track breeding territory shifts that could affect their migration routes as well?
In general, as I mentioned, birds in North America are nesting farther north. And, if you have backyard feeder, southern species that weren't there 20 years ago are, almost magically showing up on a regular basis. And I think that also is true for raptors, in that they're probably nesting farther north. Again, we have relatively little data about what happens in the boreal forest. There are people working on this, but the forests are vast, and it's difficult to just get out there and observe them because it's expensive and there's a lack of roads and lack of access. So I don't think we can be quantitative about whether there are more birds nesting farther north, but we can infer that because in general, that is the trend, not just for raptors, but all birds and insects and plants as well are moving farther north. So it's fair to imagine they are nesting farther north.
Absolutely. I think Julie has a question, and I just want to also point out that people are writing some really great observations in the comments. So everyone should take a look at other people's observations before we close out. But I'm going to hand it over to Julie, who I think has a question for you, Will.
Sure. A couple people sent me messages, Will, asking a little bit about the climate committee. I don't know if you want to talk for a minute about what the climate committee does at HMANA and if there's a way they could potentially join the committee, if there's anything in particular you're looking from people to contribute to the committee, or if it's open to people who want to join in the discussion. What do you think?
Oh, I'm pleased to hear that. Yes, absolutely. We are an open organization. We're not climatologists or geologists. We do have a ornithologist or two, and we're all, of course, share a common interest in raptors. And if you have that common interest, and particularly if you may have any professional insight into some of these issues of climate, you will be very welcome to join us. The usual format we have is we survey our news folders, our news sources for climate information. Those of us who have access to journals and find something that relates to climate and raptors or climate and birds, we'll share that or share a link. And then we have an opportunity to discuss those links. And I think one of the virtues of this is, we don't pretend to be doing scientific documentation, but we do aspire to having a fairly contemporaneous and even spontaneous sense of what's going on. The fact that this past Sunday and Monday were the hottest temperatures on Earth, that's something to discuss in terms of what our collective knowledge is about, the fate of raptors. The migration season is coming. We always talk about, well, what can we do? What can we, based on what we know up to today, literally today, what might we be looking for this fall in migration patterns or migration numbers that might be a result of some of the things that we're seeing? So you can write to me. I can be reached at at my email, which is willmweber@gmail.com, or through Julie and HMANA. Our next meeting is next Thursday. I'll be sending out a link to the meeting, and we would welcome you to join us.
I'm just adding my email address and yours in the chat if anybody needs to follow up with Will. Any comments, anecdotes, questions are all welcome. There's certainly a lot of anecdotes I'm constantly hearing from people about climate and from hawk watchers, and yeah, just to speak to what you were speaking about earlier, Will, about hawk watches. It's hard when these hawk watches that have been counting for 30 years or more are not seeing birds anymore, or we're not getting the cold fronts that we normally get in the fall, or they're finding it hard to get volunteers to stand on top of a mountain and when clearly these birds are further to the west or new trends. So this is a new chapter we're in for sure, but I'm always encouraging hawk watchers to keep counting and do things the way you have always been doing them in a standardized way. And that's really important data that we're collecting for where birds are and where they aren't, is very important information. Yeah, Carolyn?
One thing I saw from one of the comments, someone mentioned that they had a record kestrel year. And I already talked about goshawks being really bad. Well, kestrels were good this fall. They were up in a lot of places. A couple places did have recent records, not maybe as good as it was before the crash, but that's one that's looking a little better over the past several years. So that's a piece of good news too.
You know, another
Yeah.
species, while we're looking for good news, turkey vultures. No problem with turkey vulture numbers. They're definitely moving farther north and showing up in huge numbers here at the watch sites in Michigan and Southern Ontario. And I suspect other people as well are finding that phenomena.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much, Will. That was a really comprehensive look at just our changing climate, where we are as it continues to change. There's a lot of worrying trends and challenges facing raptors and birds in general. So it's a lot to take in and digest. But thank you for informing us. And it will be interesting to see how birds respond or continue to adapt, which species do okay, and maybe some that don't adapt as quickly. So thank you again. That was a great presentation. And we will have this recording up on our website soon. You can rewatch it if you need to on Facebook anytime. We're going to be hearing next month for our next Lunch and Learn from Marion Clement. She is a biologist who bans saw-whet owls. So we're going to be getting ready for migration season and talking about saw-whet migration and banding. That's happening August 21st. I still need to create that event and registration. So that will be up on our Facebook page soon and on our website. And I'll be emailing folks through e-newsletter about that. I'll also mention, Will mentioned our 50th anniversary conference is happening this fall in November in Duluth, Minnesota. Hopefully we'll get to take a glimpse at a few goshawks. There aren't a whole lot of them out there, but what few there are, we often see at Hawk Ridge. And registration is now open for that conference. So you can go to HMANA.org. You can check out our program, field trips. We're even going to be doing some saw-whet banding that weekend. You can witness. You can find that all at HMANA.org. And thank you so much for joining today and supporting Lunch and Learn and all the work that we are doing for Raptors and the hawk watching community. So hope to see you next month. And thanks again, Will. Have a good day, everybody.